I see that everyone did take that notice, and what do we have, half as many here tonight as we did last night? So as expected, I told him not to announce, so I won't tell anybody that it's Jim speaking tomorrow night, so we'll fill the house. As Jim and I were talking last night about this VBS and the topics that we're covering and the challenges it is to take some of these complicated concepts and put them into terms that everyone can understand. And so for me, I prefer simplicity. So some of these concepts are a real challenge for me, and you heard that from Ben last night as well. You know, we're studying things that are not in the Bible, but we're learning about things that are being taught outside of the church so that we can help people understand as we go out into the world the untruths and the misconceptions that exist out there. So it is worth us understanding what is being taught. What is the saying that goes, if you hear a lie 100 or 1,000 times and you finally hear the truth, you're surprised, you're shocked by it, and it doesn't even seem right. So unfortunately, our kids are being inundated with all of these lies with respect to the age of the earth, and we're going to look at that tonight. We're going to look at some of the challenges that they face, and as we go through some of these things, hopefully it will help us understand some of the challenges our kids face, some of the challenges that we face, a lot of the untruths that exist out there, so that we can learn about them and be able to know how to explain to others so that they can find the truth. As I was thinking about these topics as well, I thought about meeting with my guidance counselor. And a lot of you can probably remember that as well, when you sat down and you took your exam, your aptitude test, your attitude test, your interests, and it came back with, what is it that you should consider as a career? And I remember it gave me 3 choices. And number 1, you'd probably be surprised because you look at me and say, well, there's no way he should have been that. Well, number 1 for me was actually a chemical engineer. Yeah, I heeded that advice and went and became a CPA, so go figure. But I do look back at this lesson that I'm going to attempt to teach tonight, and if I was a chemical engineer, I'd feel a lot more confident in going through some of these concepts. So how old is the earth and the universe? In order for evolution to be true, the earth and universe must be very old. Without an extremely old universe, evolutionists admit that there wouldn't be enough time for evolution to do its slow and gradual work. According to evolutionary timeline, the universe began with a big bang, as we learned last night from Ben, about 13.8 billion years ago. The Earth showed up over 9 billion years later. Humans evolved onto the scene well over 4 billion years after that. The question for us is, does the Bible allow for such a timeline? If the Bible is silent about the age of the earth, one could argue that it might allow for an old or a young earth equally. If it provides evidence that forces us to believe that the earth is old or young, one should obey God rather than man. Acts 5:29. Trusting God's unchanging word over the ever-changing, never-perfect scientific theories of mankind. And as we learned last night, theories are defined as guesses. Sometimes they're called educated guesses, hunches. I think we now know, at least based on the things that we've been through the last couple years, a lot of them are just guesses. Based on the biblical genealogies of Genesis 5, 10, and 11, there were roughly 2,000 to 4,000 years between Abraham and creation. And if Matt was here tonight, I was going to ask him to read Genesis 5, 10, and 11, and then we would all go through and tally how many years it was so that we could verify that it was 2,000, 3,000, maybe 4,000 years between creation and Abraham. But since Matt isn't here, we won't go ahead and do that exercise. History, coupled with Scripture, informs us that Abraham lived roughly 2,000 years before Christ. And history also informs us that Christ lived roughly 2,000 years until today. So if we add that all up, 2,000 plus 2,000 plus 2,000 or 3 or 4,000, it looks like the earth, according to the Bible, is 6 to 7 to maybe 8,000 years old. Any questions? That covers the age of the earth. We can go ahead and have our refreshments now. Moses, inspired by God, states in Genesis 1 that humans were created 6 days after the origin of the earth and universe. Everything, in fact, was created in 6 days. Exodus 20:11. Moses' account fits with Paul's statement in Romans 1:18 through 32, which tells us that God's attributes have been clearly seen by man since the creation of the world, not billions of years after the Big Bang and Darwinian evolution. In Luke 11:50 and 51, Jesus himself said that the shedding of Abel's blood occurred at the foundation of the world. Who was Abel? Adam and Eve's son, killed by their other son Cain. At the foundation of the world. That's not years, that's not decades, that's not centuries, that's not millions, billions of years later. It was at the foundation of the world that this happened. So man existed at the foundation of the world. According to evolution, the earth formed roughly 4.5 billion years ago. Humans did not arrive on the scene until roughly 2 million years ago. In Mark 10, verse 6, Jesus said, God made humans from the beginning of creation, male and female. And what scripture is that referencing? It's quoting from Genesis 1, verse 27, the creation of humans. According to modern science, the universe is roughly 13.8 billion years old. Humans were not around from the beginning of creation. So 99.99% of the time that the universe was in existence, according to evolution, that time passed until the emergence of humans. And you can see that on this particular timeline. From left to right, 4.5 billion years ago, when the Earth actually came about, which was even after the universe, which started 13.8 billion years ago, according to evolution, and then finally man came about 2 million years ago. So that is compared to the creation timeline below. And you can see creation's timeline, the 6 days, and then eventually leading to the present 6, 7, or 8,000 years later. Last night, Ben got into a little bit of day. What's a day? What's a day? Well, most of us have known for a long period of time that a day is 24 hours. But can a day reference anything else? What about night and day? So during part of the day, we have light. Part of it, we have darkness, which is night, day and night. Is there any other references for the word day? I hate to admit it, but I'm almost old enough now where I can say back in the day. I've tried it with Nick a few times. Back in the day when I walked 10 miles to school, uphill both ways, through the driving snow and blizzards, from August all the way until we got out in May. He didn't buy it, but I tried. But back in the day. So there are definitions when we consider day. So is day in Genesis 1 figurative or literal? Literal being actual or figurative being representative of something. Some wishing to harmonize the Bible with the evolutionary time frame, the figurative meaning of day to the days of Genesis 1. As I was growing up back in the day, I actually remember some of these discussions going on, trying to merge evolution with the account in the Bible. How did that even come about? Well, someone saw this passage in 2 Peter 3:8, with the Lord one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. But what have we learned? What do you hear in just about every sermon? Every time we have our Bible study? What's important to do when you look at a passage, when you look at a scripture? Do you take just one verse, or do you look at the other verses around it? Maybe the verse in front, maybe the verse behind, maybe a few verses, to really understand the concept, to really understand the idea that's being presented. Someone that can describe this very well is Eric Lyons, who's with Apologetics Press. And he has a short video that's titled, "Was One Day of Creation 1,000 Years?"
2 Peter 3. (3:8) has become their leading commentary on Genesis chapter 1 and the days of creation. One day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day, right? Thus the days of creation were 1,000 years long or more. But does 2 Peter 3:8 actually teach what they're saying? Notice, first of all, that Peter doesn't actually say, with God one day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. The apostle actually wrote, "Beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." Peter used a figure of speech known as a simile to compare a day to 1,000 years. It's not that one day is precisely equivalent to 1,000 years or vice versa. Rather, within the specific context of 2 Peter 3, one could say that they share a likeness. In 2 Peter 3, the apostle reminded Christians that scoffers would arise in the last days, saying, "Where is the promise of his, Jesus, coming?" In verse 7, Peter declared, "The heavens and the earth are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men." Regardless of what the scoffers alleged about the second coming, Peter wanted the church to know that the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Sandwiched between these thoughts is the fact that the passing of time does not affect God's promises, specifically the promise of his return. If Jesus promised to return 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, it's as good as if he made the promise 1 or 2 days ago. Indeed, with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. With men, the passing of long periods of time generally affects their keeping of promises, but not with God. Time has no bearing on whether he will do what he said he would do. 1,000 years are like a day. Bible students should also consider the fact that Peter used the term day and the phrase 1,000 years. This in itself is proof that God is able to communicate to man the difference between one day and 1,000 years. For similes to make sense, one first must understand the literal difference between what is being compared. If there were no difference, then it would be meaningless to use such a figure of speech. What's more, within Genesis 1, God used the terms days and years. Many rightly have questioned if a day in Genesis is really 1,000 years or some other long period of time, then what were the years mentioned in Genesis 1? Such a definition of days makes a reasonable interpretation of creation impossible. The facts are, God knows the difference between a day and 1,000 years. Peter and Moses understood this difference. Their original audiences comprehended the difference. And any serious student today can do the same. Finally, even if 2 Peter 3:8 could be tied to the length of the creation days, which logically and biblically it can't, But even if it could, adding 6,000 years to the age of the earth would in no way appease evolutionary sympathizers. A person could add 600,000 years or even 600 million years and still not come close to the alleged age of the earth or the universe. According to evolutionary calculations, one would still be 13 plus billion years away from the Big Bang and 4 billion years this side of the formation of Earth. Truly, even an abuse of 2 Peter 3:8 will not help day-age theorists.
all that is in them. According to Moses, the universe was not created gradually in steps over eons of time. Everything was created in 6 days, not 6 billion years. And then God rested the seventh. Notably, the 7-day week concept, which characterizes Jewish and Christian calendars, is based on the idea with the Jews celebrating the Sabbath on the literal seventh day every literal week. Did the Jews get it wrong? Did they misunderstand Moses? Of course not. The Jews kept the Sabbath day every 6 literal days in every literal week. And if they did not keep the Sabbath day correctly, do you know what happened? Do you remember? In Exodus chapter 31 and 14, verse 14, you shall keep the Sabbath. Therefore, for it is holy to you. And if you do not, what are the consequences? Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. Do you think they understood? Did they need to understand? Was that just a threat? Was it just to let them know, hey, you need to take this serious? Was it followed through? Well, we're given an example in Numbers chapter 15, beginning in verse 32. Now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man must surely be put to death. All the congregations shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Did they understand the difference between a day? Did they understand the importance of the Sabbath day, to keep it holy? Can you think of anything Christians are commanded to keep holy, to observe, say weekly? If God was that serious about the Sabbath day, how serious do you think he is about observing his son's death, burial, and resurrection? Do you understand what he's saying in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 23 through 29? For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself. Do we understand the importance each time we observe the Lord's death? The Hebrew language of the Bible does not allow for an old earth or universe. The Bible writers do not allow them. Jesus himself does not allow them. So either naturalistic evolution is true and God did not create the earth, or biblical creation is true. It's one or the other, mutually exclusive. It cannot be both. And those who tried to combine the two, it doesn't work. If the earth is actually relatively young, as the Bible implies, then how do we explain the many supposed evidences of an old earth? Consider the canyons. I don't know if anybody's been to the Grand Canyon and seen the Grand Canyon. I don't know how anybody goes there and doubts that there is a God. And when you look down and you see the Colorado River way below you, the only way that could happen is because of millions and millions of years that water eroding away the rock, right? Well, that's what evolutionists would have us believe. What about petrified wood or petrified bones? Maybe you've seen petrified wood. It's like rock. It's stone. What about the rock strata? You go on vacation and you're driving down the interstate and some brilliant engineer that worked for the Missouri Department of Transportation, Jim, decided to go through this big hill rather than around it because it saves you time. Well, as you look and see what they cut through, you can see the different layers of rock. Well, those layers of rock, that had to be the accumulation of years and years, millions of years, right? Well, that's what evolutionists would have us believe. There wasn't some catastrophic event that might have led to that. Coal and oil, oh, those take forever to develop, and we have to protect those fossil fuels. So we need to move on to renewable energy because those are going to be gone in no time. What about all that ice in those places like Greenland to the north and Antarctica to the south that's just covered in ice? How did that happen? It couldn't be because of a catastrophic event and the conditions after that as the water went away and changed the weather for some time. Are you going to believe someone, I'm trying to be serious, are you going to believe in man who names something called Greenland that's covered in ice, but yet just a little bit to the east there's another island that they call Iceland that's covered in vegetation and is green? That's Iceland and this is Greenland? You be the judge. What about Lake Varves? What are those? Any idea? Varves? I had to look it up. It's sediment that accumulates over time. It'll eventually fill in a lake or a pond if you don't dredge it out. Does that take a long period of time? Evolutionists would have us believe that's the case. What about tree rings? We've studied those trees, we've cut them down. We know that the ring each year, it gets a new ring showing its growth in that particular year. Was there ever a time when there were circumstances in the weather that maybe caused more than one ring to form within a shorter period of time? What about that distant starlight? We hear about how far a star is, and the light is coming to us, and when we calculate the speed of light, how long it takes to get to us, that star is already burnt out because it's just taken so long. What about caves? Those underground caverns, the stalactites, the stalagmites, I hope I got it right. Good. My 5th grade teacher would have been proud. But those take forever. We learned about that in science. The drip, the drip, the drip, and how long it takes for those to form. What about the mountains? Those tectonic plates that come together and force that land up, that actually creates the mountains. That takes millions and millions of years, does it not? Do these examples provide conclusive evidence for an old Earth because of how long it would take for these things to happen? Well, as Ben taught us last night, the second law of thermodynamics tells us the universe is running down. It's wearing out. We're running out of usable energy. Matter itself is breaking down. Various elements break down into other elements over time, and the breakdown appears to be at a constant rate. Scientists are able to measure that rate at which a parent radioactive isotope decays into another element. And they can do that with an amazing amount of accuracy. However, a major issue arises based on what evolutionary geologists do with the information that they gather in the process. They try to take that element that exists today and calculate it back in time. And that's where they run into problems. While this procedure might seem reasonable, there are significant issues with this practice. The older a specimen is said to be, the more inaccurate the dating technique. The margin of error grows higher and higher. One reason scientists are aware of this fact is because different dating techniques are often used to date the same specimen. And what do they come up with? Differences in the age. Is it days? Is it weeks? Months? Years? Decades? Centuries? No. Millions of years in their differences on these calculations. I thought the weatherman had a pretty easy job. They could be right maybe 50% of the time and keep their job right, maybe even less. All they have to do, these evolutionists, is get within millions of years. Ironically, the evolutionary geologists acknowledge that the violations of the assumptions are not uncommon. So let's look at some of the assumptions that go into the evolutionists' calculations. One major assumption upon which radiometric dating techniques are based is that while a specimen might currently have various daughter elements in it, it is assumed that no daughter element existed in the specimen at the beginning of its decay. So let's take an element like uranium, and it becomes, as it decays, another element, and that is lead. That's the daughter element. So the original is uranium, and it becomes the daughter element in time, which is the lead. That's how they make some of their calculations. The dating technique, therefore, assumes that the rock was initially completely composed of the parent element. So, for example, a big block of uranium, and it has no other elements in it. That's all that exists. Is it not possible and even likely that a specimen might have been initially composed of more than one element that blended together during a geological phenomenon before the rock's decay process began? Is it not possible that various rocks were even created by God from the outset, composed of more than one daughter element due to the usefulness of having those elements already in existence rather than waiting for the emergence through the decay process? Would God not be able to do that and see a need for that? How about assumption number 2? A second assumption on which the radiometric dating techniques are based is that amounts of parent and daughter isotopes in a specimen have not been altered during the decay process by anything except radioactive decay. So it's like all of this decay happens in a lab. No other forces whatsoever are impacting this. That's one of the assumptions that they're making. The specimen being examined is in a closed system. Elements present in a sample have not ever been affected by outside elements. Now, how likely is that in just 1,000 years? What about lava flows, floods, mudslides, meteor activity? Elements in a specimen have not been affected by outside forces? Does that even seem reasonable? According to Ian McDougall, professor of geology in the Research School of Earth Sciences at the Australian National University, and T. Mark Harrison, professor of geology in the Department of Earth and Space at UCLA, have said this: departures from this assumption, in fact, are quite common. So you're hanging your hat on these calculations when you know that these assumptions and these variations are quite common, particularly in areas of complex geological history and decay. To blindly claim a closed system for a specimen that is believed to be very old is reckless and unreasonable, when there is clear evidence that a closed system cannot be guaranteed, and when there is compelling evidence that ancient Earth was rocked by a global catastrophe, and I'm thinking that you would probably know what that might have been. A third assumption, such as dating techniques in keeping with uniformitarian principles. The nuclear decay rate of elements being measured have remained constant throughout history. There's nothing that would ever change that rate of decay that's being measured. However, research conducted in 2003, as recent as 2003, indicates that the nuclear decay rates have not always been constant. Surprise, right? Zircon crystals dated by expert evolutionists using the uranium-lead evolutionary dating technique, which is one of the most popular, and found them to be 1.5 billion years old, assuming that constant decay rate. A byproduct of the breakdown of uranium into lead is helium. Content analysis of the crystals revealed that large amounts of helium were found to be present. Uh-oh. If the crystals were as old as the dating technique suggested, there should have been no trace of helium. Why is that? What do you know about helium? It's a gas. Since helium atoms are known to be tiny, light, unreactive, and able to easily escape the spaces that they're confined within, there's a real problem with this measurement. The presence of helium and carbon-14 showed that the rocks were actually much younger and in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 14,000 years old, not 1.5 billion. The results of the crystal dating indicate that 1.5 billion years worth of radioactive decay based on the uniformitarian constant decay rate assumption occurred in only a few thousand years. How could such a thing be possible? How could the two dating techniques be reconciled? By understanding that the rate of decay of uranium into lead must have been different and much higher at some point in time. The bottom line is radiometric dating methods have been shown to be unreasonable and unreliable methods for dating materials thought to be old. They do not prove an old Earth. The evolutionary model cannot lean upon radioisotope dating methods to substantiate the claim that there has been enough time for evolution to occur. What about the other supposed evidences of a young Earth that we looked at? To respond to many of those arguments, let's hear what Dr. Jeff Miller from Apologetics Press has to say in his video, Have Evolutionists Proved That the Earth is Billions of Years Old?
Statistics show that the majority of Americans believe that the Earth is extremely old, on the order of millions or billions of years. Why do they believe that? Well, no doubt it's because they've been told by the scientific community that the Earth is that old. But why does the scientific community believe the Earth is that old? Well, many scientists believe in an old Earth because they believe there are several evidences that support that belief, like radioisotope dating techniques, how much time it would take to erode canyons like the Grand Canyon, how long it would take to petrify a tree or bone, turning it to stone, how long it would take for the material found in the rock layers to build up, how long it would take for coal and oil to form in the age of diamonds, how long it would take for the ice layers in Greenland and Antarctica to build up, how long it would take for the varves that are found in lakes to build up, how long it would take to form the thousands of rings found in living and petrified trees, how long it would take light to get here from stars that are billions of light years away from us, how long it would take for caves to form, how long it would take for mountains to form, how long it would take to move the continents from Pangaea to their current positions. No doubt, that definitely sounds like a lot of evidence. Does the evidence prove that the Earth is millions or billions of years old? Well, no, and here's why. Every single one of those examples are based on a basic assumption, which, if it's wrong, causes all the examples to be removed from the list of evidences of an old Earth. The assumption is called uniformitarianism, the belief that we can look at the geological processes that are happening on the Earth today and project our observations back in time to figure out what happened on the Earth in the past based on what we see today. Uniformitarianism assumes that only things happening today happened in the past. Features of the Earth that we see today had to be formed by processes that we observe today. The assumption is that there never have been unusual or even supernatural events in the past which don't happen today. but which could have in the past sped up processes that we see happening slowly today. If those processes were faster in the past, then the features that were made by those processes are much younger than they appear. But each of these processes assume uniformitarianism. For instance, radioisotope dating techniques assume that nuclear decay rates have stayed the same as they are today throughout history, even though there are recent evidences that disprove that assumption. Canyon erosion evidences assume that canyons have always eroded away at the same rates that they do today, even though we have many evidences of catastrophic events which have eroded canyons rapidly. Petrification is assumed to have always happened slowly and gradually as it is thought to do today, even though many recent studies have shown that catastrophic rather than uniform activity speeds the petrification process up. Stratification, the buildup of materials that become the rock layers of the geologic column, is assumed to have happened slowly over millions of years since sediment accumulation is so slow today. But volcanic eruptions, mudslides from flooding, and polystrate fossils have shown that strata can be built quickly. Coal, oil, and diamonds are assumed to have needed millions of years to form, since modern processes seem to require that. But again, recent studies have showed that that assumption is false. The circumstances for the rapid formation of coal have been shown to be present after volcanic activity. Oil forms rapidly, both naturally and in laboratories, and diamonds have been found with carbon-14 in them, proving that they're only a few thousand years old. Tree ring studies assume that only one tree ring forms every year, as is the case today, but scientists have discovered that unusual weather circumstances can cause more than one ring to form each year, the very weather circumstances which would be predicted to be the case during the Ice Age after the flood. Starlight from stars that are billions of light years away is assumed to have traveled to the Earth at the speed of light, as it seems to be doing today, and yet various evidences suggest light might not have traveled here naturally. If starlight was created supernaturally, for example, obviously, it wouldn't have traveled to Earth in the normal, natural way it does today. As is the case with the formation of tree rings, ice core layers are assumed to form annually, one layer per year. But once again, evidence from the past several years has shown that ice core layering can form sub-annually when irregular weather patterns are present, again, like the conditions we'd predict to be the case during the post-flood ice age. Similarly, lake varve buildup is assumed to be at the rate of 1 varve per year in lakes, but volcanic eruptions and the conditions from the Ice Age can cause varves to build up faster. It's true that mountain formation is very slow today, but that's because the Earth's tectonic plates are moving at a slow pace today. But there's mounting evidence that the plates move much faster in the past, which would cause the mountains to form faster and would decrease how much time was necessary to move the continents to their current position. Cave formation is assumed to have taken tens of thousands of years or more in some cases, because it would take so long for weak carbonic acid to seep down through the ground to the cave and slowly dissolve the limestone that then makes up many of these caves, and then hundreds to thousands of years added on to that for the formation of the speleothems like stalactites and stalagmites after the cave forms. Once again, uniformitarianism is assumed in such calculations. More and more evidence is being discovered that suggests that caves have been dissolved quickly from sulfuric acid instead of slowly from carbonic acid. And sulfuric acid would have been abundant during the flood due to the heavy volcanic activity and bacterial activity. The rate of the formation of speleothems in caves is assumed to have always been at the slow rate we see today, about 1 inch per century. But higher levels of rain than we see today, a different surface air temperature, and a higher drip rate, droplet concentration, and carbon dioxide levels in the soil increases the speed that speleothems grow, and each of those factors would have been significant during the post-flood ice age. Once the assumption of uniformitarianism is dropped, each of these so-called evidences of an old Earth disappear. When catastrophic activity is taken into account, catastrophic activity associated with the flood, the post-flood ice age, and even catastrophic events that happen today, the ages of mountains, rock layers, starlight, the polar ice caps, lakes, coal, oil, diamonds, caves, canyons, fossils, radioactive rocks and trees, they all plummet, falling into the biblical time frame. There's absolutely no scientific reason to believe that the earth is millions or billions of years old. There's no reason to believe that its age isn't exactly what the Bible implies it to be, 6,000 to 8,000 years old. In fact, there's every reason to believe that it is as young as the Bible claims, since we can know from the evidence that the Bible is inspired by God, which means it's true, and therefore it can be trusted in its claims about the young age of the earth. For more information, be sure to check out our website at apologeticspress.org.
our best estimate, going back in time to the flood. Assume each human replaces themselves with 1.2 children, same assumption. Assume each human lives an average of 1 1/3 generation, again, same assumption. Assume each generation 38 years, so all of your kids have been had by the time you're 38 years old, resulting in 138 generations since the global flood. Statistical formula reflecting these factors shows that the population would be what? 6.7 to 8.1 billion people. That's a big number. That's a big number. What do you think the population of the world is today? Do you know? Well, just like anything, you can go to the internet and find it. So I went to the World Population Clock. Population, and I actually got it yesterday, so it's a little higher than it was yesterday, but on June 5th, 2023, the World Population Clock, census.gov, shows 7,974,115,180, almost 3. Does that fall within the parameters of the creation model? 6.7 billion to 8.1 billion? It does. I wonder why. Could it be that it's actually correct? So once again, just so that you can have this in your mind, 7,975,000,000, which is a big number, you can see it there. That's the creation model compared to evolution. Where did the people go? Where is there evidence of all those people that have disappeared that should have been living on the earth over the past million years? Not there. Let's look at it another way. Let's look at the population relative to Earth mass. So let's even round it up just to make the numbers easier, to 8 billion people. So let's say approximately 8 billion people living on Earth. And let's draw a little square 2.5 feet wide, 2.5 feet, 2.5 feet, 2.5 feet. That works out to be 6.25 square feet. So we're not shoulder to shoulder. And if you put Anna in that square, she's got enough room to even play and run around. But, those of us that are a little bigger and, with broad shoulders like me, probably 2.5. Don't laugh. Wow, no respect. But let's just say that we can do that, and we're not packed in like sardines in that 2.5 by 2.5 foot box. How much space would that require? Well, what we'd be looking at is 1,795 square miles of land. So if we took all 8 billion people in the world, it would take 1,795 square miles of land standing in those 2.5 foot boxes. How big is that? Would that fit within, the United States? So let's look at the United States by size. Total area on the left, land area on the right, water area, or land area in the middle, water area on the right. Because we don't want our boxes to be in the water in a lake or a pond or a river. So what are we looking at? Where would it fit in the United States? Remember, 1,794 square miles. Well, there it is. The second smallest state in the United States, Delaware, 1,949 square miles. So we even have a little extra space. We can continue to grow. They would all fit. We could take the whole world and we could all go to Uncle Joe's vacation spot in Delaware, and we could all gather there. We would all fit in Delaware. Isn't that amazing? Well, if you remember your geography, here shows you Delaware and how big Delaware is. There it is over there on the East Coast. You can see it compared to Missouri. Wow, Missouri, we can handle that 8 billion in those boxes very easily. We could actually handle 34 of the populations on Earth today in the state of Missouri. What about that number, that 10 to the 2,000th power? How big of a space would that require if we put them in those 2.5 by 2.5 foot boxes? Any idea? It would not fit into the Milky Way universe. That's how big that number is. At current rates, it takes 5,730 years for half of the radioactive element carbon-14 to break down into its daughter element, nitrogen-14. With such a short half-life, after 57,300 years, less than 0.1% of the original carbon-14 atoms are left in any specimen. Current technology does not allow scientists to detect carbon-14 in specimens thought to be older than 6 to 100,000 years old. All the measurable carbon-14 is gone. If carbon-14 is detected in any uncontaminated specimen, the specimen cannot be older than 100,000 years. Fossilized wood, thought to be 65 million years old, dinosaur fossils, thought to be 66 to 252 million years old, reptiles, thought to be 252 to 541 million years old, have been discovered with carbon-14 present. Similarly, coal, thought to be 40 to 320 million years old, diamonds, thought to be billions of years old, have yielded carbon-14 upon examination. If you remember, that means that none of those elements can be any older than 10 to 6,000 years old. As a result, the geological column, the fossil record, are not a record of life through time, but of death during the flood a few thousand years ago. The dinosaur era extends from roughly 252 million years ago to roughly 65 to 66 million years ago, according to evolutionists. Obviously, no flesh could conceivably survive 100,000 years, much less 1 million years, or 65 million years, or up to 200 million years. But as of 2005, many fossils, including dinosaurs, have been cracked open and studied, only to find collagen and blood vessels with red blood cells intact. Original proteins and soft, stretchy, flexible tissue was found. The list, including T-Rex, Triceratops, mosasaurs, pterosaurs, to name a few, all found with these elements. While certain sterile conditions could conceivably preserve organic remains for hundreds of thousands of years, the fossils being studied were not discovered in sterile laboratory environments, but rather harsh environments, like what we know, the Midwestern U.S., with large temperature differentials, erratic weather, and climate conditions that accelerate decay, not preserve. A most plausible explanation is that dinosaurs do not date back to 66 million plus years ago, but rather only a few thousand. The objective of highlighting scientific evidences for a young Earth is not to prove a young Earth, but to show that the assumptions such as uniformitarianism cause all scientific dating methods to be suspect. Since no human observed the creation of the earth, we cannot empirically prove how long ago it was created. The only way to know the age of the earth, then, is through divine revelation. The Bible, which does not require a blind faith since it proves itself to be from God, does not allow a millions to billions of years old earth. The scientific dating methods used to prove an old earth are riddled with issues. In fact, provide just as much evidence of a young earth as they do an old earth. Evolution has no conclusive evidence that the earth is old. If a person wishes to follow the evidence to a logical conclusion, he will reject evolution for having insufficient evidence to substantiate its more basic necessities. At this time, we'll ask Brother Jim, if he would, to lead us in prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, study what is going on in our society, the assumptions and hypotheses of creation, being not true, but being something of happenstance. Thank you, Lord God, that we have so much evidence, both biblical and outside of it, to verify that you are the Creator, that all things came through you, and we can have confidence and faith that that is true. As we go through these lessons, let us retain some of the information, we won't retain it all, but some of the information that help us to gain our confidence and be able to teach others and be able to refute those who believe in the assumption that you are not the Creator, that things happen because they just occurred. Thank you, Lord God, for those who have prepared lessons for this class. Thank you for Brett and others that have prepared VBS for us and so many people being able to attend. We ask that you watch over us all, be with us, and care for us, and let us be confident in our knowledge of you and our love for you. In Jesus Christ's name.